Hello, Internets! This is Adam Brinckerhoff coming to you from SpaceUnited headquarters in Arvada, Colorado. And joining us from nearby Boulder, Colorado, is our volunteer, good friend, and guest co-host, Koichiro DeLuca. Say hello, Koichiro.
Hello, everyone.
Wow, if that wasn't a graduate school hello, I don't know what it is. You realize that the day started a while ago, right?
Not for me.
Well, if that's not true, I don't know what is. All right, so we're going to jump right into today's topic. Today we're talking about how to protect human rights with space imagery. And we have a great guest for you guys here in a few minutes. But right now we're going to talk through a couple things about the topic in question. You see this beautiful image of Jordan that we donated earlier this year to the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. And a few topics on space imagery you can see on the slide to the left, the first of which is the capabilities. So what can this imagery do, what can't it do? And I'll let Koichiro kick it off with some of the capabilities.
Yeah, so what I mean by capabilities really is what kind of assets do we have to be able to use for doing this kind of thing. So what I mean by that is what kind of satellite systems are out there for a organization like us, or maybe someone else that might actually be listening in on this to use these things. So one of them actually is a company called Digital Globe, which is actually here local in Colorado, just a little bit north of Boulder and Longmont. And they have a fleet of satellites that take images like this. And from what I remember, they were actually they had donated imagery when the tsunami in Japan happened. So that's one example of how that's used. There's a few other commercial companies out there. Some of them in San Francisco, like Skybox Imaging and Planet Labs. That's sort of the Silicon Valley side of it. And you also have a number of university teams launching satellites. Some of them have thermal infrared type of capability to be able to detect and monitor wildfires and assist people that way. So there's just a whole slew of these capabilities that we can use, and I don't think a lot of them are yet really utilized to their full extent.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One other company to mention is Airbus. So most people out there think of Airbus for their work on planes, but they actually recently acquired Astrium, which does some imaging work as well. And so within the Airbus Defense and Space Department, they have those satellites and, those capabilities to image as well. So there's a lot of satellites up in the sky, a lot of images being taken and archived in their databases. But obviously those resources wouldn't be there unless they had customers or users. So there's a whole defense side to things which we really won't go into today, but we're more concerned with humanitarian work, specifically human rights work. And so you have a lot of different users taking advantage of this imagery. Like Koichiro said, sometimes it's donated, especially when there's a really big newsworthy event like the Japanese tsunami or the Haitian earthquake. But on a day-to-day basis, as we'll talk about with our guest Christoph in a minute, there are human rights issues going on all over the world, and so we need a constant source of data. And when I say we, I mean the humanitarian community. So we're proud to be a part of that, helping specific relief partners. We're in the process of partnering with Amnesty International, Christoph's organization, but all over the world there are both governmental and non-governmental organizations that are trying to help people become free from either government repression or a number of other issues using satellite imagery, and we'll talk about the specifics later. But just keep in mind that when you have satellites and you have images available, when it comes to human rights, there's nonprofits that you might think of just being people that go and hand out food, because that's probably a lot of the video footage you've seen or a lot of the news coverage that you've read. But behind all of that are a group of users either within those organizations or with partner organizations like ours that are using this imagery to analyze exactly what's going on so that they can inform the people on the ground and they can do their work more efficiently. So as I've implied, there are a lot of people out there that are benefiting from the use of this imagery. Koichiro, what are some of those groups, or who are those people?
Yeah, so those really can be anyone. Some of the people that we've seen in our work here is it might be people, refugees and refugee camps that might benefit from getting more efficient distribution of aid materials because of the satellite imagery that was used to analyze where those needs are. It could be people in poverty, and to be able to use the satellite imagery to better assist them to be more economically empowered. And it could just be people in an area of the world that's just been stricken by disaster. Just having the situational awareness there, it could be the key between life and death, kind of a thing. So there's a bunch of a varied group of people that can benefit from this type of satellite imagery and the various impacts associated with them. So yeah, with that, I'll hand it off to Adam again to talk a little bit about what those specific impacts are.
Yeah, so on an individual basis, like you mentioned, there are a lot of different people that are benefiting from the use of this image, or imagery. But on a big scale, there are major changes going on. I think us in the U.S. Often take for granted how connected we are, and that is in a lot of different ways. We've spoken in the past, I think, about internet connectivity and phone connectivity and just all the different ways that we can communicate. But a lot of that also has to do with mapping. So a lot of people think, oh, well, I have Google Maps on my computer, or I have a globe that stands in the corner of my office or whatever. Like, everyone kind of knows where things are in the world, which is true, but things are always changing. And as a U.S. citizen and living in the U.S. is incredibly well mapped and incredibly well monitored in terms of all sorts of different things that are changing. So transportation and farming, weather, all sorts of different things. But that isn't the case in other parts of the world. And so just like any industry with supply and demand, there's a lot of demand in the U.S. for really intricate systems of mapping, but if people can't pay for it, there's not a whole lot of the same type of data in other parts of the world, and so it's really kind of a hodgepodge and pieced together. But when you are able to map or sense remotely an area very well, it helps you manage all of those things better. I mean, transportation, communication, farming, all sorts of stuff like that. In fact, just as a case study, there's a village out in Cambodia that we're getting ready to support with our next donation. With an organization called Lightbridge International, and they live in a minefield, basically. It's a minefield left over from a war that happened back in, I believe, the 80s, the 1980s, and the people are very poor and don't have a lot of education, and so there are a lot of different things going on in that village that need improvement to get to even a basic level of sort of lifestyle. And one satellite image can help with road construction, so they can see where they need to go. It can help with population estimates, so that they can see where people are living and how many people they need to serve. It can help with mine detection and mine location, because over the years people have left pockets of land in their village where they know mines are, and so it can help them identify exactly where those are and how to go disable them. It can also help them with construction. So the Lightbridge people have made a school building in the village, and they want to expand it. But if it's a high-resolution image, they can see exactly how much land they have to work with and what the dimensions are, and the best way to lay that out. So just one image can create these big sort of holistic impacts for one area and really help not only each individual person but the whole community as a whole. I keep saying whole, but you get the idea. It's a really powerful tool, and we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to jump into our interview in a minute, but before we do, we're going to run through our awesome sponsors real quick on the next slide. So just to review, these guys have been helping us for a long time, and we talk about them every week, but we just love what they do for us, and we're really appreciative of the work that we're able to do given their help. So AGI does a lot of work with space software. As you can see on the slide, they also do work with land, sea, and air, but obviously as SpaceUnited, our interest is in their space technology, and they have developed and continue to improve a toolkit called Satellite Toolkit, or STK. It's a very popular software package both in the aerospace industry as well as in the university and educational worlds. There's actually a free version that you can download to try it out, and it helps a lot with modeling different parts of a space mission, whether it's launch or orbiting around the Earth or another planet, and then also all of the other data that is collected and communicated over the course of a mission, like communication data or science data. You can see when at different points in time the satellite can see different antennas on Earth and so on and so forth. So it's a very easy to use tool, but it has a lot of depth to it in terms of the different things that you can do and how accurate and involved you can get with your modeling. So definitely check that out and their software in general. Koichiro already mentioned Digital Globe. Digital Globe has helped us in a variety of ways in the past, and we really enjoy working with them, especially on our imagery mission. Space Foundation is a great organization based in Colorado Springs, and we've worked with them a number of different ways. The most relevant is coming up both this weekend and next weekend. We'll be going there for their summer science series, where they bring in kids from the area and teach them all sorts of different things about space and science, and we will be there promoting our organization and sharing what we do with the table, so come visit us then. I believe that's the 9th and 16th of August. Finally, Uingu is a great organization that does work with funding different science projects, which is always important. Everyone needs money to do what they do, and the way that they accomplish that is through selling naming rights for exoplanets and Mars craters. So go to their website, uingu.com, name a crater on Mars or a exoplanet, and you will support science development and space development all over the world. All right, well, without any further ado, we're going to jump into our interview for the day. We have a return guest who we're happy to see back, Christoph Koettl. He is an emergency responder that works for Amnesty International. He specifically uses satellite imagery to fight crime all over the world. He is a crime fighter extraordinaire. I would say Batman, but I don't know if he has any comic book allegiances, so I don't want to assume anything there. Christoph, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Can we grab your... Oh, there it is. There's your video. Awesome. Now my video is on too. All right, so let's jump right into it. So from the perspective of fighting humanitarian or human rights violations, what's the easiest type to fight, and what's the most difficult?
Mm-hmm. Sure, that's a great question, I think. So in my experience, and I'm doing this work now for around 7 years, I think the easiest or most, let's say that's really straightforward work to do with remote sensing is to document something like housing demolitions, and I think it's very, very easy to explain that. Housing demolitions are just really, really clearly visible from space. So it's very easy to document that through remote sensing. And I can give you a few very specific examples. We have worked with satellite imagery to document housing demolitions in places such as Chad in Africa, in Nigeria, but also at other places such as Cambodia. So it's very, very straightforward to get a before image and an after image, and what you see in the image, easily explained, is you have a block of houses there, and suddenly a few months later they are gone. And how it normally works is we get ground reports from partners of people who are impacted by these housing demolitions that this is happening, so we can get satellite imagery and show how this looks like from space. And the reason why this is very, very useful and compelling for us is, on the one hand, it's very, very visual. So that's important for a grassroots organization and campaigning organizations such as Amnesty. So it's very clearly, it's very straightforward for everyone to see that there's something wrong here. But on the other hand, and that's not really talked about a lot, it allows us to do a very systematic and comprehensive assessment. So we can look at N'Djamena, the capital of Chad, and it takes us 1 or 2 weeks to do a comprehensive assessment of the whole city. And that would not be possible by just sending a researcher there on the ground, because 3,000 homes are affected. You can't just send one researcher to go from house to house and do a manual count. So that's why it's very, very useful. I think a second area that I want to mention is definitely armed conflict situations. You see a lot of destruction of civilian infrastructure during armed conflict, and that's something that's also very visible using satellite imagery. And I think my last point here is that's actually something that people can also do by, for example, using Google Earth. So you can go to Google Earth and use historical imagery to look at the impact of armed conflict or housing demolitions. For us, of course, it's we very often work on real-time situations, so we want to have more current imagery. That's why it's important to actually sometimes just buy imagery to do the analysis.
Great. So then, go ahead.
I think you also wanted to have a few harder examples, so maybe I should go into that a little bit as well. So one thing that we struggled on a very regular basis is that we get requests from colleagues. We get reports of, for example, mass graves, and mass graves sometimes means it's a very small area, maybe 20 people were killed and reportedly dumped into a hole in the ground, and we don't have access to this area, so people want to get satellite imagery, and that is sometimes that can be very difficult with satellite imagery, because what we get occasionally is what you see in the image is that you see disturbance in the earth. And for us, without having a testimony or ground access, it's very, very difficult to make that call to say that this is definitely a mass grave. And we had this situations in the past, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire a few years ago. So we didn't publish this because we weren't really convinced that that is really a mass grave, and we want to be careful, of course, and very accurate in our information.
Right. Yeah, I could see both of those. I mean, it's great to get the inside perspective on all of that, and while there are things that are easy and hard, it's important to, like you said, across the board, make sure that the information is accurate. And so I would imagine that there's the ongoing struggle with kind of confirmation on the ground versus the data from up in the sky. So in general, I know you work in this area specifically, but I'm sure that you work with other partners that do both. So from what you've seen in your experience, what advantages does space imagery give that other forms of relief doesn't help with?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So for us, I think one huge advantage is to just get access in the first place to a specific area we are interested in. And as I mentioned before, I work a lot on armed conflict situations. So what that means is it's just too difficult to get direct access for our researchers. And on the other hand, you get a lot of misinformation during these armed conflict situations. So just having access to an area to get a snapshot to see what's going on is extremely valuable for human rights groups such as Amnesty. In other cases, you have an armed conflict situation or even a non-armed conflict situation. We are just not allowed to go there. So the government, doesn't allow us to get to the affected area. So that's again very, very useful for us to have satellites in space that can give us a snapshot and can give us an overview of what's going on the ground. To give maybe 2 examples, we worked with satellite imagery on Sri Lanka or Darfur, most recently Syria. These are armed conflict situations where it's difficult to get to for us sometimes. Maybe a situation where there's not an armed conflict, but it's difficult for us to get to is North Korea, and that was like widely publicized over the last few years. So we get a look at these huge political prison camps that we are interested in, and an area such as North Korea that is so restricted to go to, that provides a lot of added value for us. So there's definitely a lot of additional information that we can get that we would not get through our traditional work. So that's really, really helpful. And on the other hand, as I mentioned before with the housing demolition example, it's just very helpful to sometimes get a very systematic and comprehensive overview over a specific human rights situation versus maybe just collecting individual testimony, which is also important, but it only gives you, like a very limited view, of course, of a given situation.
Yeah, I can see that being a really interesting aspect of it. I think a lot of times when people, and again in the U.S. hear about something like an armed conflict, they would think, oh, well, why don't you call someone, or why don't you email someone, or look at social media? But in a lot of those cases, either those resources aren't available, or like to the people themselves, or it's either shut down by the government, or there are a lot of hurdles to get over when it comes to getting good information in an area.
Yeah, I think that really brings it to the point. Maybe one more recent example where that was highly relevant for us during the recent unrest and armed conflict in the Central African Republic. We got satellite imagery of a specific town where we have received reports of armed attacks, and that allowed us to say that I don't know, I think it was around 450 structures were burned down in that specific village in a given time. So that gave us a lot of information, allowed it to publicize it almost in real time. And that's, of course, very, very helpful for us in our advocacy work. So we were able to publicize that on our blog. It was very compelling imagery, so it's extremely helpful in situations like that.
Yeah, I bet. All right, I'll give Koettl a chance to pipe up. Koettl, do you have any questions for Christoph before I ask my last one?
Yeah, I do, actually. So, one of the questions that comes up fairly often for us is, why don't we do this with UAVs to, get imagery quickly and cheaply? So, my question is, what advantages does satellite imagery have uniquely over sort of like an aerial photo?
Sure. I think at this point, I think it's definitely. One clear answer to that is, operationally, I think it's very, very difficult for us to get an UAV and fly into an armed conflict zone. So there are some legal aspects to that, and also how to, it would mean if we even would get a researcher on the ground in an armed conflict situation, that person would have to bring an UAV and operate it from there. So that's kind of like an additional burden on that researcher, and it's also a very dangerous, I think, endeavor. So I think we're not at the point where we could just do that. I think using a satellite in space, the legal aspect I think is a little bit more straightforward. It's also much safer for us as Amnesty, to use a satellite in space. So that might be in the future, that might change, but at this point I don't know a lot of UAVs being deployed in active conflict zones, and you have to be careful because you might become really a direct party to that conflict by flying around with a UAV in that conflict zone. So I think we want to take it slower and get a little bit more clarity on how that would actually work in real life.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
The other aspect to that too, I think, not having direct experience with it, but just from a general knowledge of the aerospace world and also of conflicts like that, is I would think it would be a risk to the hardware itself. For instance, you have the recent tragedy of and obviously the details are still being sorted out, but the Malaysian flight that crashed over Ukraine, maybe it was shot down, maybe it wasn't, maybe it was, I don't know, this group or that group, but I think there would also be the risk of flying something but then having it get destroyed by the people that are fighting to begin with.
Definitely. There was actually very compelling footage of the protests in Istanbul, I think last year. So there was one journalist who deployed a drone, and I think after a week or so it was shut down.
Yeah, so there you go. There's a question of the capital investment in, well, how long is it going to last and how much data is it going to get. without really knowing. Like with a satellite, you know, I mean, there's long-term lifespan issues, but for the most part, you have a much better, more secure knowledge of how long the data is going to be available. All right, well, on a more personal note, when it comes to space imagery, I'm curious, Christoph, you've probably seen hundreds, if not thousands, of satellite imagery or images come across your desk, but do you have a particular favorite, either one that was just a beautiful shot of an area or one that tied into a particular story that really stands out in your mind?
Sure. So I would say like I have definitely one image that I found was the most compelling and the most moving for me in my work, and that's a satellite image of the city of Osh in Kyrgyzstan from 2010. So there was a lot of unrest around that time. So we did our, traditional work with getting imagery to document violations and destruction there. But one very, very interesting result that we didn't expect was that we found 116 SOS signs throughout the city. So that was really, really moving and compelling imagery. And the interesting thing about this was that the SOS were laid out in a way that it was not very useful for, I think, ground observers. So that really told us that people were communicating to somebody who was watching from above. So it was really interesting. I think that somebody, I think people, changed their behavior because they were knowing that somebody might, and yeah, I think you have it up here, might be watching from above, and that might be from a satellite or maybe from like a helicopter or so. So that was really, really interesting and moving for us to see that sort of footage. What was very interesting, and that ties into a lot of work that I'm doing recently, which is verification of this sort of footage that's up on the internet. Like I think a few months ago, somebody used that image to create a fake story of a woman that was stranded on an island, and somebody on Google Earth found this image, and that's how she was rescued. So of course that was a big hoax. So that story came back to us a few months ago.
That's really interesting, yeah, I could see where the effect on you would be really poignant, because it's almost like someone knows that you're up there. They don't know exactly who you are, but they're aware of the satellite component and the space imagery component, and that's their cry for help to whoever's watching. That's fascinating. All right, well, before we run out of time,
I actually have the image that Christoph is talking about actually off of the Amnesty website right now. You can see the SOS.
Yeah, we got it, and
you got it? Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned it, but I saw when Christoph mentioned it, and I have it up on the video so everyone can see it. But
awesome.
Yeah, no, definitely go check it out, and let us know your answers to our other questions as well. We'll spend a couple minutes asking you some questions, and then we'll turn it over to the general public to see if they have anything too. So like we always do, we ask you the same questions that we ask our guests. What do you think the easiest and hardest battles to fight are via space imagery? And if you haven't given it much thought, I mean, use some of the experiences that Christoph has had and other pieces that we've mentioned over the course of the podcast, and let us know what you think. What are maybe some new ways that we could use imagery, or ways that we can improve some of the techniques that we have now? And then what do you think those advantages are? I mean, we talked about some. One of the things I hadn't mentioned yet was one of our partners that we donated our image from Jordan to Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. They mentioned recently that they're working on a tool and demonstrating it right now with a lot of really positive feedback that actually automatically counts hut roofs. And so it might not sound like that big of a deal, but I'm sure Christoph knows that counting people and knowing population densities and population sizes of various areas is really important for, a lot of relief work and humanitarian work. So there are not only the raw data that we use, but also constantly developing tools to improve upon that data and ways to really mine it in such a way that we can get the most out of it. So give us your thoughts on ways that space imagery has advantage over other areas and what we can do to make it even better. And then finally, go look on Google Earth, or our friends at TomNod within the digital globe world do a lot of stuff with crowdsourcing. So check out those websites. Look around and tell us what your favorite image is. Is it Christoph's with the SOS? Is it something else online? Send it to us or mention it. Give us a link at Twitter. We use the hashtag SpaceUnited for all of our questions and answers. So at any point in time, if you are hearing this on a podcast, audio or video, just submit a question to our Twitter page or just out in Twitter in general, hashtag SpaceUnited, and we'll be happy to get back to you, either the answers to these questions or questions that you have for us. All right, we're about out of time. I'd just like to quickly thank Koichiro DeLuca for co-hosting, Christoph Koettl for being our guest, and from all of us at SpaceUnited, thanks for tuning in. Keep exploring for good, and we'll see you next week. Bye, guys.